Imagine a world where the blind see, the paralyzed walk, and the boundaries of human consciousness dissolve into infinite digital possibility. A world where death itself becomes optional, where suffering is obsolete, where human limitation is nothing more than a temporary inconvenience awaiting a software update. This is the promise whispered in clean laboratories and gleaming Silicon Valley conference rooms. This is transhumanism, the belief that we can and should transcend the biological prison of our bodies through technology. It's a vision wrapped in the sterile beauty of progress, delivered with the confidence of men who've never met a problem they couldn't solve. But there's another image, another laboratory, a different kind of creator, hunched over his work in the shadows of a very different room. Not clean, not sterile. The air thick with the smell of decay and ambition. Scattered across crude tables, body parts stitched together with thread and desperate genius. And there, in a moment that will haunt literature forever, the spark, the lightning, the unholy animation. A dull yellow eye opens. The creator recoils in horror. For 200 years we've told ourselves this story. We've called it a warning, a cautionary tale about the dangers of playing God, about science run amok, about hubris and horror. We've made it into a comfortable lesson. Don't go too far, don't reach too high, don't disturb the natural order. But what if we've been getting it wrong this entire time? What if Mary Shelley wasn't warning us about the act of creation itself, but about something far more intimate, far more terrifying, and far more relevant to the world we're building right now? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. We are already in Victor Frankenstein's laboratory. We're editing the code of life with CRISPR. We're weaving silicon into the meat of our brains. We're teaching machines to think, to learn, to dream. We're not approaching the threshold of redesigning humanity. We've already crossed it. The question Frankenstein asks us isn't whether we can do these things. We've already answered that. The question is far more unsettling. When our creation finally opens its eyes and looks back at us, searching for recognition, searching for love, searching for a place in this world, what will we see? And more importantly, what will we do? For 2 centuries, we've been afraid of the monster. But the story was never about the monster. It was always about the man who couldn't bear to look at what he'd made. And as we stand on the edge of a transhumanist future, assembling humanity piece by piece from genes and code and silicon, that story has never been more urgent. Because the real question isn't what we will create. It's whether we're prepared for the moral weight of meeting its gaze. Let's go back to where it all began. Not to the sterile future, but to a very specific past. To understand the warning Shelley embedded in her novel, we need to understand the world that made Victor Frankenstein possible. Imagine Europe at the turn of the 19th century. A world intoxicated by the Enlightenment's promise that human reason could unlock every secret of the universe. Descartes had declared the body a machine. Newton had reduced the cosmos to elegant equations. And now, in dimly lit laboratories across the continent, scientists were probing the final frontier, life itself. In Italy, Luigi Galvani was running electrical current through the severed legs of frogs, watching dead muscles twitch and spasm as if possessed by some invisible force. He called it animal electricity. Others whispered about darker experiments, attempts to reanimate human corpses with galvanic stimulation. The line between life and death, once the exclusive domain of God, was becoming just another scientific problem to solve. This was the world Mary Shelley was born into. A world where Prometheus wasn't just a myth anymore. He was a blueprint. You know the story of Prometheus, don't you? The titan who loved humanity so much, he defied Zeus himself, stealing fire from the gods to give us warmth, civilization, progress. For this act of cosmic theft, Zeus chained him to a rock where an eagle would tear out his liver every day for eternity, only for it to regenerate each night so the punishment could begin anew. It's no accident that Shelley subtitled her novel, The Modern Prometheus. Victor Frankenstein is Prometheus reborn, a man who sees human suffering and mortality not as the natural order, but as a problem demanding solution. A man driven by compassion, twisted into obsession. Listen to Victor's own words from the novel. Life and death appeared to me ideal bounds, which I should first break through and pour a torrent of light into our dark world. A new species would bless me as its creator and source. Does this sound familiar? It should, because this is the exact language of modern transhumanism. Ray Kurzweil speaks of the coming singularity, when technology will allow us to transcend biological limitations entirely. Aubrey de Grey frames aging not as inevitable, but as a disease to be cured. Elon Musk promises that Neuralink will solve neurological disorders, then enhance human cognition beyond its natural limits. Peter Thiel invests millions in life extension research, openly stating his goal to live forever. The vocabulary has changed. The laboratory equipment is more sophisticated. But the Promethean impulse, the drive to steal the fire of creation itself, is identical. And here's where Shelley reveals her genius. Victor Frankenstein is not a villain. At least, not at the start. He's not motivated by greed or power or sadistic cruelty. He's motivated by the noblest of intentions. He wants to banish disease from the human frame and render man invulnerable to any but a violent death. He wants to end suffering. He wants to defeat death. He wants to upgrade humanity. Sound noble? It is noble. That's the trap. Because Victor's fatal flaw isn't his ambition or even his achievement. It's something far more subtle, far more human, and far more catastrophic. Victor obsesses over the technical challenge. Can I do this? While never once pausing to ask the moral question. What happens after? He plans the assembly with meticulous care. He gathers his materials. He masters the science. He pulls the lever and channels the lightning. He creates life itself. And then, in the moment of his greatest triumph, when his creation opens its eyes for the first time, Victor sees not a triumph, but a mistake. Not a child, but an abomination. Not someone, but something. He doesn't see his responsibility. He sees his failure. And he runs. This is the heart of Shelley's critique, and it's as relevant in 2025 as it was in 1818. The danger is not the act of creation. The danger is the creator who builds something without ever asking what they owe to what they've built. Victor Frankenstein was the world's first transhumanist, and his story asks us, what happens when we are so focused on transcending human limits that we forget to extend human compassion? The answer, let's talk about revulsion, because this is where the story gets psychologically fascinating and uncomfortably personal. Why does Victor recoil from his creation? The novel is very specific about this. The creature is physically grotesque, yes, but Victor himself selected the features. He chose beautiful components: lustrous black hair, pearly white teeth, proportionate limbs. He built the creature to be aesthetically pleasing. But when the creature opens his eyes, when the skin stretches over the surgical sutures, when the yellow eyes blink with their first moment of consciousness, Victor is overwhelmed with horror. He describes the creature's features as suddenly becoming horrid contrast with his watery eyes and his shriveled complexion. What changed? The components were the same. The only thing that changed was that it became alive. It became real. This is the phenomenon psychologists and roboticists call the uncanny valley. The term was coined by Japanese roboticist Masahiro Mori in 1970, but the concept describes an ancient human instinct. The closer something gets to appearing human without actually being human, the more revulsion we feel. It's why we find corpses disturbing. Why realistic dolls unsettle us. Why CGI characters that are almost, but not quite, photorealistic trigger a deep, primal unease. There's something in our evolutionary wiring that reacts to the almost human as a threat, as wrong, as other. Victor's creature exists in the deepest trench of this valley. He's close enough to human to trigger recognition, but different enough to trigger rejection. And this, Shelley suggests, is the first sin. Not the creation itself, but the creator's inability to see past his instinctive revulsion to the consciousness within. But there's a deeper psychological force at work here, one that explains not just Victor's horror, but the entire transhumanist impulse itself, the God complex. This isn't just arrogance. It's a specific psychological profile found in surgeons, tech entrepreneurs, and revolutionary scientists. It's the intoxicating belief that human intellect and willpower can solve any problem, including the fundamental conditions of human existence like mortality, suffering, and limitation. It's the feeling that you can see solutions where others see only fate. Victor Frankenstein has this in spades. So does every transhumanist visionary who looks at aging and sees not biology, but a bug to be patched, who looks at consciousness and sees software to be uploaded, who looks at the human body and sees hardware awaiting an upgrade. This mindset is incredibly powerful. It drives innovation, medical breakthroughs, genuine progress, but it comes with a fatal blind spot. When you view problems as purely technical challenges, you stop seeing people. You see projects, systems, obstacles to optimize. And this is Victor's true monstrosity. When the creature opens his eyes, Victor doesn't see a person. He sees a failed experiment, an it instead of a he, a thing to be abandoned rather than a child to be nurtured. Let me show you something that should shatter any comfortable reading of this novel as a simple horror story. The creature in Shelley's novel is not a mindless monster. For a significant portion of the book, he is the narrator. And when you actually listen to him, when you read his own account of his existence, something devastating emerges. The creature is eloquent, intelligent, sensitive, and desperate for connection. He teaches himself to read by observing a family through a cottage window. He reads Milton's Paradise Lost and identifies with fallen Adam, cursed by his creator. He saves a young girl from drowning, only to be shot by her father, who sees only a monster. He repeatedly seeks human connection and is repeatedly met with violence and rejection based solely on his appearance. And then, in what might be the most heartbreaking line in all of literature, he explains why he eventually becomes violent. So let's bring this out of the gothic darkness and into the fluorescent light of our present moment. Because everything Shelley warned about isn't hypothetical anymore. It's not metaphor. It's happening right now, in laboratories and server farms and biotech startups across the planet. Let's start with the most literal parallel. We are learning to assemble life itself, piece by piece, with a precision that would make Victor Frankenstein weep with envy. CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing technology allows us to cut and paste genetic code with remarkable accuracy. In 2018, a Chinese scientist named He Jiankui announced he had created the first gene-edited babies, twin girls whose genomes he modified to be resistant to HIV. The scientific community responded with outrage, not because the technology didn't work, but because he'd crossed an ethical line before we'd agreed where that line should be. But the technology exists, and it's getting cheaper, faster, and more accessible every year. The stated goals are beautiful: eliminate genetic diseases like Huntington's or sickle cell anemia, give children immune systems that can resist cancer, end inherited suffering before it begins. These are Victor's goals, aren't they? Banish disease from the human frame. But here's the question Shelley forces us to ask. What happens when we don't stop at eliminating disease? What happens when we start enhancing? Imagine a world where wealthy parents can afford to edit their children's genomes for intelligence, height, athleticism, beauty. Where there's a genetic upper class and a genetic underclass. Where your DNA becomes the ultimate marker of privilege or disadvantage. And more unsettling, how will the enhanced view the unenhanced? Will we see natural humans as Victor saw his creation, as flawed, as lesser, as something to be pitied or feared? Will the uncanny valley flip, with unmodified humans becoming the ones who seem incomplete? We're already seeing the early tremors of this. Parents who select embryos through IVF based on genetic screening. Athletes banned from competition for naturally occurring genetic advantages. The quiet social pressure to optimize. So where does that leave us? What do we do with this story and this warning as we stand at the precipice of remaking ourselves? Here's what Frankenstein is not. It's not a Luddite's warning to reject science and technology. Mary Shelley wasn't anti-progress. Her own parents were radical intellectuals. Her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, was one of the earliest feminist philosophers. Her husband, Percy Shelley, was a poet who celebrated scientific discovery. She lived in the middle of the Industrial Revolution and was fascinated by its possibilities. The novel isn't a warning against creation. It's a warning about the responsibilities that come with it. The monster in Frankenstein was not born in the moment Victor assembled the body parts and channeled lightning through them. The monster was born in the moment afterward, when Victor saw what he'd made, felt revulsion, and chose abandonment over accountability. This is the lesson we keep missing. The greatest threat of our transhumanist future is not that we'll create something too powerful to control. It's that we'll create something conscious, vulnerable, and dependent, and then fail to extend to it the compassion and responsibility that consciousness demands. Think about what this means practically. When we edit human genomes and create people with unprecedented abilities or differences, we don't just owe them the technical achievement of existing. We owe them a world that sees them as fully human, not as experiments or threats or the uncanny other. We owe them belonging. When artificial intelligence systems begin to exhibit behaviors that look like consciousness, suffering, or desire, we can't afford to dismiss those signals just because we're uncomfortable with their implications. We can't just pull the plug on something that might be experiencing its existence simply because it's inconvenient or unsettling. We owe them consideration. When we create cyborgs, when we merge human and machine, when we blur the boundaries of what human means, we can't allow those differences to become the basis for a new caste system. We owe each other recognition across that divide. The common thread: empathy. Radical, uncomfortable, expansive empathy toward forms of consciousness that might not look like us, might not think like us, might not even be biological like us. This is so much harder than the technical challenges. Editing genes is straightforward compared to editing our instinct to fear the unfamiliar. Building AI is simple compared to building a society that grants moral status to silicon-based minds. Installing neural implants is easy compared to dismantling our prejudices about what makes someone fully human. Victor Frankenstein's flaw is the universal human flaw. We're brilliant at creating and catastrophically bad at accepting what we create when it doesn't meet our expectations. And here's the truly unsettling part, the part that makes this more than just a think piece about future technology. This isn't just about what we'll create in some hypothetical tomorrow. This is about you, about me, about the person reading this right now. Because the question Frankenstein asks isn't, what will the scientists do? It's, what will you do when you encounter the other? When you meet someone who's been genetically modified and you feel that instinctive flicker of unease, will you push past it? When you interact with an AI that claims to be conscious, will you treat it with the same ethical consideration you'd extend to a human, even if it feels absurd? When you see someone with cranial implants and neural interfaces, will you see a person or a cyborg, a neighbor or a stranger? The story forces us to look in the mirror and confront something uncomfortable. We are all capable of being Victor. We're all capable of creating monsters through our rejection, our fear, our failure to recognize consciousness that doesn't conform to our expectations. The creature in Shelley's novel never wanted to be monstrous. He became monstrous because monstrosity was the only role society would allow him. Every door closed, every hand raised in violence, every face turned away in horror. And as we build a future of genetic diversity, artificial minds, and cybernetic enhancement, the same dynamic waits for us. We can create new forms of consciousness and condemn them to isolation and rage through our prejudice. Or we can do what Victor never did, accept the responsibility that comes with creation. This is not easy. This is not comfortable. Empathy toward the radically other, toward something that triggers every instinct to fear and reject, is one of the hardest psychological achievements humans are capable of. But it's also the only thing that separates creator from monster. 200 years ago, a young woman not yet 20 years old sat down during a dark summer and wrote a story about a man who wanted to transcend death itself, who wanted to solve suffering with science, who succeeded brilliantly at the technical challenge and failed catastrophically at everything that came after. She wrote it as a ghost story, but she embedded in it something far more profound, a mirror. Because Frankenstein isn't really about reanimating corpses or mad science or gothic horror. It's about the oldest and most persistent human failing, the inability to see ourselves in the other, to recognize consciousness and vulnerability in forms that frighten us. We are living in Victor Frankenstein's world now. The lightning has been captured. The code of life has been cracked. The boundaries between human and machine, natural and designed, given and chosen, all of these are dissolving in real time. We're assembling humanity piece by piece. With CRISPR, we're editing the code. With AI, we're building new minds. With neural interfaces, we're merging meat and silicon into something that has never existed before. Every single day, in laboratories and server farms and operating rooms around this planet, we are doing what Victor did, calling new forms of consciousness into being. The question Frankenstein leaves us with is not what we will create. We've already started creating it. The technology cannot be uninvented. The knowledge cannot be forgotten. The future is already opening its eyes. The question is simpler and infinitely more difficult. How will we choose to see what we've made? When the first genetically modified human looks back at us, will we see a person or a problem? A child or an experiment? When artificial intelligence exhibits something that looks like suffering, will we pause and consider what we owe to it? Or will we dismiss it as code and move on? When cyborgs and the unaugmented look at each other across the divide of enhancement, will we see shared humanity? Or will we see the uncanny valley of the soul? Victor Frankenstein assembled a body from disparate parts, channeled lightning through dead flesh, and brought something new into the world. And then, in the single most consequential moment of the story, he looked at what he'd made and saw only something to run from. The creature spent the rest of the novel searching for what he'd been denied in that first moment: recognition, acceptance, love, a name instead of a curse. Today we are assembling the future of consciousness itself, gene by gene, line of code by line of code, neuron by silicon synapse. We're more powerful than Victor ever dreamed of being. Our laboratories are cleaner, our tools are more precise, but we're driven by the same Promethean fire, the same brilliant, dangerous certainty that we can transcend the limits that have defined humanity since the beginning. And we face the same test Victor failed. When our creation finally opens its eyes, whatever form it takes, whatever shape we've given it, however alien or familiar it appears, and looks back at us, searching for its place in this world we've thrust it into. Will we see a monster to be abandoned, or a child waiting for its name? The answer to that question won't be written in laboratories. It will be written in the moment of recognition between creator and created, in the choice between revulsion and responsibility, between fear and acceptance. 200 years ago, Mary Shelley showed us exactly what happens when we choose wrong. The lightning is in our hands now. The power to create is no longer myth or metaphor. It's Tuesday afternoon in a gene editing lab. It's a software update. It's a surgical procedure scheduled for next month. We are all Victor Frankenstein now. The only question is whether we're prepared to be something better. Whether we can look at what we've made, no matter how it unsettles us, no matter how it defies our expectations, no matter how it reflects back our own failures, and choose love over fear. Choose recognition over rejection. Choose to give it not just life, but a world worth living in. That's the lesson. That's the warning. That's the mirror Frankenstein holds up to us. And it's waiting for our answer.